The void above the war-torn planet of Vraxia Secundus shuddered like the surface of a wounded sea. Its stars dimmed, smothered beneath a veil of violet light. Imperial augur arrays screamed warnings across the orbital defenses moments before every screen went dead, leaving only the silence of deep space and the trembling hymns of terrified tech priests. In the absence of machine readouts, human eyes bore witness to the unthinkable. A tear appeared in the fabric of reality, a jagged wound opening where there had been only void. The rift bled light, not the golden light of the Emperor's holy radiance, nor the baleful fire of the warp storms so feared by navigators, but something stranger, mocking, playful, like a grotesque jest writ large upon the canvas of the universe. Bolts of lightning danced across the edges of the tear, illuminating the shattered hulls of derelict ships drifting like bones around a predator's mouth. From within came voices, first whispers, then screams, then laughter. It was laughter that chilled the soul, for it carried no joy, only madness. On the planet below, guardsmen of the 117th Vraxian Infantry Division huddled in trenches, carved through the ash dunes outside the capital city of Vraxhold. For weeks they had held this defensive line against cultists sworn to the Dark God. The enemy was relentless, waves of fanatics crashing against lasgun volleys and heavy bolter fire. Now even these hardened soldiers turned their gazes skyward, watching in silent dread as the sky itself split apart. Sergeant Merrick spat into the dirt, his knuckles white as he gripped the worn stock of his lasgun. "Emperor, save us," he muttered. The words had barely left his lips when something fell from the tier. It was not hurled like debris, nor did it descend with the majestic terror of a drop pod. It simply tumbled, a limp shape, flailing wildly as it plummeted through layers of burning atmosphere, trailing smoke and streaks of unnatural green light. It landed far behind the front lines with a distant, bone-shaking crash that sent a plume of dust into the air. In the command bunker beneath Vraxhold, Vox channels crackled with confused reports. Some claimed a meteorite strike, others swore they'd seen a daemon's birth. The senior officers conferred in hurried, clipped tones, their faces hidden behind rebreather masks. Inquisitorial protocol dictated immediate investigation. Orders were barked down the line. A squad was dispatched to secure the site, miles away, amid the twisted wreckage of what had once been a manufactorum. The figure lay sprawled across a crater floor. His suit was scorched, torn in half a dozen places, but still garishly red and black. Smoke curled from his boots. His mask, stretched into a permanent leer, was covered in ash. Beneath it his voice broke the silence. 10 out of 10 landing, right? Stuck it like a champ. The figure Deadpool groaned and sat up, shaking his head as though trying to rattle the universe back into place. His healing factor was already knitting together burns and fractures. The air reeked of promethium and rotting flesh, a pungent bouquet that made his eyes water behind his mask. He glanced around, taking in the alien ruins, the charred banners bearing symbols he didn't recognize, the distant thunder of artillery. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "this isn't Jersey." Before he could piece together where, or when he was, shadows moved at the crater's edge. 7 guardsmen in flak armor, their lasguns raised, descended into view. Their eyes were hard, their expressions hidden beneath their helmets, but Deadpool felt the weight of their suspicion like a physical thing. "Identify yourself, mutant," the squad leader barked. His voice was muffled by a Vox grill but sharp with Imperial discipline. Deadpool blinked. "Mutant, buddy. I'm an exotic import." He spread his arms, grinning beneath his mask. "Take me to your leader. Or, your taco truck." The guardsmen didn't laugh. They didn't even blink. One of them muttered something about heresy. Another made the sign of the Aquila, fingers trembling. "By decree of the commissariat," the squad leader continued, "you are to be taken into custody for interrogation and possible execution. Resist, and you will be purged." Deadpool tilted his head. "Execution? You're skipping right past trial and going straight to kill the weird guy in red spandex." Harsh. When they moved to restrain him, he let them at first. It wasn't until they tried to cuff his hands behind his back that he slipped free with a flourish, spinning their leader's lasgun like a toy before handing it back. "Whoa there, Sparky. I don't like being touched without dinner first." he quit. The guardsman froze, caught between fear and confusion. Deadpool took the opportunity to look skyward. The tear still hung there, distant but unmistakable, an open wound in the heavens. Something about it stirred a strange unease even in his fractured mind. He didn't know what had dragged him here, but he could feel it watching him. One guardsman, pale beneath his helmet, whispered, "It's a sign from the warp." "Quiet," the squad leader snapped, "until the commissar judges this thing. It is nothing but a prisoner." Deadpool tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Commissar, huh? Sounds important. Maybe he knows how to get me home, or at least where the nearest burrito joint is." The squad began marching him back toward the city, their movements tense and jerky. Above them, the tear pulsed once, briefly illuminating the battlefield below in sickly green light. In the heart of that light, far beyond mortal sight, something vast stirred. A laugh echoed across the warp, answering Deadpool's earlier quip with a tone of mockery so deep it rattled the very foundations of reality. Deadpool's own laughter faltered. For the first time since arriving, he felt a sliver of fear slip beneath his armor of humor. And far away, within the rotting cathedrals of the Chaos Cult, a sorcerer turned his blind gaze skyward, and whispered, "The fool has come." The march back to Vraxhold was slow and silent, broken only by the crunch of boots through ash and the distant growl of artillery. Smoke hung over the landscape like a suffocating shroud, obscuring the horizon, and turning the dying light of the sun into a dull blood-red haze. The ruined manufactorums loomed on either side, their skeletal frames jutting up like the bones of ancient, titanic beasts. The guardsmen moved with a grim precision born of years at war, their weapons always at the ready, their eyes scanning for the next horror to emerge from the wasteland. Deadpool, shackled but unbowed, shuffled along at their center, humming tunelessly under his breath. His flippant demeanor grated against the soldiers' brittle nerves, though they dared not speak. The squad leader, Corporal Vask, kept glancing back at their captive, as though expecting him to vanish into thin air, or erupt into demonic fire. So Deadpool said cheerfully, breaking the oppressive silence, "You guys got a name for this place, or do you just call it Welcome to Hell? Population?" "You." Vask's head jerked toward him. "Silence, heretic. You will speak only when spoken to." Deadpool tilted his masked head, unbothered. "Heretic? That's a strong word. Back home, people usually go with handsome devil, or restraining order recipient, totally different vibe." One of the guardsmen hissed a prayer under his breath, fingers nervously tracing the sign of the Aquila. Another muttered, "Emperor protect us," as though the words might ward off the blasphemy that seemed to spill so easily from this stranger's mouth. The path wound through the outer defense lines, trenches choked with the dead, both friend and foe. Corpses were stacked like cordwood, their flesh already rotting beneath the poisonous air. Buzzing clouds of carrion flies rose in lazy spirals, and the stench of decay clung to everything. Deadpool's masked nose wrinkled, though he forced a theatrical gag. "Whew, someone forgot to take out the trash, or like the entire cemetery." He paused, peering down at a fallen guardsman whose body was little more than a ruin of flesh and shattered armor. "I don't suppose you guys recycle?" Vask's jaw tightened beneath his rebreather. "Show some reverence for the dead, mutant." Deadpool sighed dramatically. Fine. Reverence engaged." He gave an exaggerated bow. "Oh, dearly departed, may your space god light up your afterlife, or whatever." The guardsmen's collective tension spiked, but they said nothing. They were too tired, too afraid of both the strange figure they escorted and the commissar awaiting their return. The commissar's wrath was legendary, his executions carried out in full view of the regiment to remind them of their duty. As they neared Vraxhold, the scale of the city came into view through the haze. Its towering hablocks and cathedral spires rose from the ash, like blackened teeth, lit by the constant glow of defensive fire. Vox speakers blared endless sermons, extolling loyalty to the Emperor, their droning chants barely audible over the rattle of gunfire and the pounding of heavy artillery. Entire sections of the outer walls were pocked with blast scars, reinforced by crude field repairs and chains of penitence nailed to the masonry as living warnings. Deadpool slowed, taking it all in. For once he didn't crack a joke. The sheer scope of the suffering and madness gave even his chaotic mind pause, "Wow," he said at last, voice quieter, "and I thought my neighborhood had issues." The squad ushered him through the gates, past checkpoints manned by grim-faced sentries in soot-stained armor. Every gun swiveled toward Deadpool as he passed. Civilians, thin, hollow-eyed, and wrapped in ragged robes, scurried out of sight, whispering prayers as they glimpsed him. To them, he was just another monster, added to an endless parade of nightmares. Inside the central bastion, the air was thick with incense smoke. Statues of the Emperor loomed over narrow corridors, their stone eyes watching every passerby with silent judgment. Deadpool was led through twisting passageways, until they reached a heavy iron door flanked by guards in pristine uniforms. Vask halted, and snapped a salute. "Prisoner secured, Commissar," found at the site of the anomaly. The door creaked open, and the Commissar emerged. He was tall and skeletal, his greatcoat hanging from his frame like a funeral shroud. A peaked cap shadowed his eyes, but the cold gleam of authority radiated from every precise movement. His bolt pistol was immaculate, polished to a shine that mocked the grime of the war zone outside. "Bring him," the Commissar said, his voice like a blade, drawn from a scabbard. Deadpool was shoved forward. He wobbled theatrically, then straightened and saluted. "Reporting for duty, Captain Crunch." The Commissar's expression didn't change. "You are no soldier of the Emperor. You are an abomination. I will see your true nature revealed before the sun sets." He circled Deadpool slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "You appeared amidst a warp anomaly. You bear no sanctioned marks of the Imperium. Your tongue spews mockery instead of catechism. Tell me, creature, what dark power do you serve?" Deadpool crossed his arms. "None of the above. Thanks, I'm freelance, and my power? Mostly bad decisions, and an impressive metabolism." The Commissar's lip curled. "Enough. Take him to the purification chamber. If he survives the trial by flame, we will know he is merely mutant. If not, the Emperor's justice will be done." The guardsmen obeyed, though several exchanged uneasy glances. Vask lingered for a moment, whispering, "Emperor, guide us," before following. Deadpool was dragged down another corridor, his usual chatter fading, as he caught sight of the chamber ahead. Its walls were blackened by old fires, chains hung from the ceiling, priests in rust-colored robes chanted litanies, their voices harsh and guttural. In the center stood a towering brazier, flames licking skyward with a hungry hiss. "Whoa," Deadpool muttered, eyes widening behind his mask. "This is either a barbecue or a really bad spa day." The priests turned toward him, their faces hidden behind bronze masks, shaped like skulls. One raised a censer, filling the air with choking smoke. The Commissar's voice rang out from behind. "Begin." As the chains closed around Deadpool's wrists, he glanced up at the warp-torn sky through a narrow slit in the ceiling. For just an instant, he thought he saw something looking back at him, something vast and laughing. His mouth went dry, and his next joke died in his throat. The flames roared higher. The trial had begun. The brazier's fire surged, belching waves of blistering heat that turned the chamber into a suffocating furnace. Deadpool squinted behind his mask as acrid smoke coiled upward, stinging his eyes and coating his throat in a bitter metallic taste. The chanting of the priests grew louder, rising and falling in a rhythm older than the city itself. They swayed around him like a circle of vultures, their bronze masks reflecting the flicker of the flames, each intonation a demand for purity and a condemnation of corruption. Chains rattled as Deadpool struggled half-heartedly, the iron biting into his wrists. Normally, fire didn't bother him. Well, it hurt, but not for long. His body would mend itself in seconds. Still, there was something unsettling about this fire. It wasn't just heat. It felt alive, as if the flames were aware of him, probing for weaknesses beyond flesh. For the first time since his arrival, Deadpool felt a pang of unease deep beneath his humor. The Commissar stepped into the circle of firelight, his greatcoat swirling behind him, like the wings of a carrion bird. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, a figure carved from ice and iron. His gaze swept over the priests, the guardsmen, and finally the prisoner bound before him. "Citizens of Vraxhold," he intoned, his voice carrying through the vaulted chamber.
We stand upon the edge of damnation. A creature has fallen from the warp, born of the same Imperium that spawns the foul servants of chaos. The Emperor commands vigilance. The Emperor commands judgment. He turned his gaze fully on Deadpool. This anomaly shall be tested. Should he withstand the purging flame, we will know he is a mutant to be studied, contained, perhaps harnessed for the Emperor's service. Should he perish, his screams will be a hymn to the cleansing of corruption. Deadpool tilted his head. Wow, no pressure or anything. Just, live or die horribly in front of a crowd. I feel like I'm back on open mic night. The commissar didn't blink. He merely gestured sharply to the nearest priest. The robed figure thrust a rod into the brazier, pulling it free a moment later, with its tip glowing white-hot. The crowd of guardsmen gathered at the edges of the chamber shifted uneasily. Sergeant Fask's hands twitched near his lasgun, but he didn't move. Deadpool tried to inject a note of levity into the moment, his voice faltering slightly as the rod drew close. So, does this come with s'mores, marshmallows, a nice bottle of wine? The priest pressed the heated metal against Deadpool's chest. Flesh sizzled, and the smell of burning meat filled the air. Deadpool screamed, not from pain, he'd felt worse, but from sheer reflex. The guardsmen flinched at the sound, some whispering prayers, others looking away. For a heartbeat, the commissar's cold mask of composure flickered. Deadpool's wound sealed almost instantly, the charred flesh knitting together as though time itself had reversed. The crowd gasped. Even the priests hesitated, their chants faltering. Impossible, one of them hissed. No mortal could. Deadpool leaned forward despite his chains, smoke curling from his chest. Ta-da, and for my next trick, I'll make your morale disappear. The commissar's eyes narrowed to slits. He drew his bolt pistol with a motion as smooth as it was lethal and aimed it squarely at Deadpool's head. The room fell silent, the fire's crackle suddenly deafening. Mutant, the commissar said softly, or Damon, there is no other explanation. His finger tightened on the trigger, and both deserve death. Deadpool tilted his head, unbothered. Hey, you wanna talk about this? Maybe work through some of those control issues. The shot rang out. A bolt round exploded against Deadpool's skull, splattering gore across the floor. His body went limp, chains rattling as his head lolled grotesquely. The crowd exhaled as one, a grim satisfaction mingled with relief. The commissar lowered his weapon, his expression unreadable. Then Deadpool's body twitched, bone cracked and reformed. Flesh crawled back into place like living wax. Within moments he stood upright once more, his mask reforming over his newly healed face. Okay, he said cheerfully. Ow, also, rude. Several guardsmen stumbled backward, crossing themselves and shouting prayers. One dropped his lasgun entirely, terror twisting his features. Even the priests stepped back, their chants devolving into incoherent mutters. The commissar did not move, though his jaw clenched tight. Witchcraft, he snarled. This is the work of the war. He must be destroyed before his corruption spreads. Deadpool shrugged. Dude, relax. I'm not spreading anything. Well, except maybe my unique brand of charm. The commissar raised his pistol again, but Vask suddenly stepped forward. His face was pale, his voice trembling, yet there was steel beneath his fear. My lord, with respect, he fought against the cultists when we found him. He killed them, saved us. If he were a servant of chaos, why would he not turn upon us instead? The commissar's glare shifted to Vask, heavy with disdain. You question my judgment, Sergeant. Vask swallowed hard but did not back down. I only ask, what if he is sent by the Emperor himself, a weapon to turn against his enemies? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The idea was dangerous, heretical even, yet tantalizing. The Astra Militarum was stretched thin. Reinforcements were weeks away, if they came at all. This strange, unkillable warrior could turn the tide or doom them all. The commissar's expression remained carved from stone. Slowly, he holstered his pistol. Very well, he lives, for now, but he will march with us, fight with us. Should he show even the slightest sign of corruption, I will execute him myself. Deadpool raised a hand. Quick question. Does that come with health insurance, dental plan, maybe a nice uniform? The commissar ignored him. "Take him," he ordered. "The enemy gathers. The city will soon be under siege, and we must be ready." As Deadpool was unchained and thrust into the custody of the guardsman, the commissar turned back to the brazier. The flames no longer seemed holy. They danced higher than before, twisting into shapes that mocked human forms. In their crackle, he thought he heard laughter, not from Deadpool this time, but from something far older and far crueler. His hand hovered near his pistol as he whispered a prayer to the Emperor. Deep in his gut he knew that this judgment had not ended. It had only begun. The air outside the fortress city tasted of ash and fear. Sirens wailed from the upper bastions as searchlights swept across the horizon, their pale beams slicing through the swirling smog. Deadpool marched at the center of a squad of guardsmen, his red and black form standing out like a bleeding wound amid the muted drabness of their flak armor. The commissar had made his decree clear. The strange warrior would fight alongside them or die under their guns. The guardsmen kept their distance, some glancing nervously at him, others refusing to meet his gaze at all. Deadpool, of course, filled the silence. "So," he said brightly, "where do you guys keep the big guns? You know, the pew-pew death cannons. Do we get tanks? I want a tank, preferably one with cup holders." No one answered. The only response was the crunch of boots over caked mud and shattered masonry. Sergeant Vask, walking just ahead, kept his eyes fixed forward, his jaw clenched so tightly, the muscles trembled. The squad had been sent to patrol the ruins beyond the outer defenses, a scouting run to probe the enemy's positions. It was dangerous, thankless work, the kind of duty given to soldiers, considered expendable, and now, thanks to the commissar's command, they were dragging along a lunatic, whose body refused to stay dead. They moved through the charred skeletons of manufactorums, past the rusting hulks of once mighty war machines. Every surface bore the scars of decades of war, bullet holes, scorch marks, and sigils daubed in blood by cultist hands. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant thud of artillery and the occasional skitter of vermin in the rubble. Deadpool stopped abruptly beside a toppled statue of a robed figure, whose face had been hacked away. He cocked his head. "Nice decor. Very haunted cathedral chic. Bet this place gets 5 stars on the tourism brochure." "Keep moving," Vask snapped. His voice was tight, as if speaking too loudly might draw unwanted attention. Deadpool sighed theatrically and trudged on. "You guys are no fun. You know what we need? A team name. How about the Emperor's Little Helpers?" "No, tough crap." They reached a blasted avenue where the road had collapsed into a smoking crater. Beyond it, the haze thickened into a dark wall that obscured everything past 20 meters. Vask raised a hand, signaling for a halt. The guardsmen crouched behind chunks of broken ferrocrete, weapons ready. "Contact imminent," one of them whispered. Shapes emerged from the fog, figures moving with jerky, inhuman motions. As they drew closer, the flicker of torchlight revealed flayed skin, ragged robes, and faces stretched into grotesque masks of devotion. Cultists, dozens of them. Their guttural chants carried through the ruin like the droning of diseased insects. "Emperor preserve us," another guardsman breathed. Vask set his jaw. "Hold until they're in range. Fire on my mark." The cultists broke into a run, screaming praises to their dark god. The fog seemed to move with them, writhing unnaturally as if the very air bent to their madness. "Mark!" Vask roared. Las fire erupted from the guardsmen's rifles, crimson bolts cutting through the darkness. Cultists fell screaming, their bodies convulsing under the precise volleys. The smell of scorched flesh filled the air, sharp and metallic. Deadpool's eyes lit up behind his mask. Finally, some action. Before anyone could stop him, he charged forward with twin katanas drawn, laughing like a madman. The guardsman shouted in alarm, but he was already among the enemy. His blades flashed, cutting down cultists with terrifying speed. Heads rolled, limbs were severed, blood sprayed in wild arcs gleaming in the hellish light. The cultists shrieked, some trying to flee, others throwing themselves at him in a frenzy. Deadpool moved like a dancer, every slash and thrust blending brutal efficiency with mockery. "Peekaboo," he shouted, stabbing one through the throat. Oops, wrong hole. The guardsmen watched in stunned silence for precious seconds before Vask snapped them back to focus. Advance, support him. They surged forward, Laskin spitting fire. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Cultists fell by the dozens, yet more poured from the fog, their numbers seemingly endless. A massive figure loomed behind them, a towering brute of muscle and rusted armor wielding a cleaver, the size of a man. It bellowed a challenge that shook the ruins. "Big guy," Deadpool shouted gleefully, called Dick. He leapt onto the brute's back, plunging his swords deep into its shoulders. The creature roared, thrashing wildly. It slammed Deadpool into the ground with bone-cracking force, but he sprang back up, limbs popping back into place with sickening snaps. Round 2. Ugly, he yelled. The brute swung its cleaver, carving a trench through the ground where Deadpool had stood a heartbeat earlier. Deadpool vaulted over the swing, jammed a grenade into the creature's mouth, and kicked it away. The explosion turned the monster's head into a wet mist, its body collapsing like a felled tree. The guardsmen gaped. Even Vask, hardened by years of war, could not hide his shock. Deadpool turned to them, arms raised like a triumphant performer. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience." The moment of stunned silence ended, as a horn blared from the fog. More cultists were coming, too many this time. The ground shook under their charge. "Fall back," Vask ordered. "Back to the line." The guardsmen began a fighting retreat, firing as they moved. Deadpool lingered at the rear, gleefully cutting down anyone who got too close. Bolts of warp energy crackled in the mist now, tearing craters in the ground. Something far worse than cultists was approaching. A searing blast struck Deadpool square in the chest, vaporizing flesh and bone. He staggered, but did not fall. His body reformed almost instantly, the smoking wound knitting itself together. The enemy froze in confusion for a single crucial moment. Deadpool grinned. "My turn." He hurled himself into their ranks like a living storm. Screams filled the night. The guardsmen, inspired by his impossible resilience, rallied and redoubled their fire. When the last cultist fell, the fog began to thicken. The squad stood amidst a sea of corpses, their breaths ragged, their armor smeared with blood and ash. Deadpool sauntered back toward them, whistling a jaunty tune, utterly untouched by the carnage. Vask stared at him, disbelief warring with gratitude. "Emperor's mercy," he muttered. What are you?" Deadpool spread his arms, striking a heroic pose. "Me, I'm your new best friend." Vask said nothing. Behind him, the sky rumbled ominously. From the distance came the low guttural sound of a war horn. Not human, not sane. The battle had been only the beginning. The squad staggered back through the outer defenses under the pale light of the fortress search beams, their boots leaving dark prints in the ash as they carried their wounded and counted their dead. The ruins they had left behind were eerily silent now, save for the occasional hiss of cooling metal, or the wet drip of blood sliding from broken blades. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something worse to come crawling out of the fog. Deadpool skipped along at the rear of the column, untouched by the exhaustion that clung to the guardsmen like a second skin. His suit was smeared with gore and ash, but his stride was light, almost jaunty. If not for the trail of severed limbs and warped cultist corpses behind them, he might have looked like he was coming back from a carnival rather than a battlefield. Yet beneath his outward cheer, a strange unease prickled at the back of his mind. Every so often he would pause and glance over his shoulder, as though expecting to see something lurking just beyond the edge of sight. There was nothing there, only the smog, shifting sluggishly in the wind. But the feeling remained. The voices had begun during the retreat. At first, Deadpool thought it was just his usual brand of crazy kicking in, a familiar chorus of quips and nonsense rattling around his skull. But this was different. The words were sharper, more focused, and they weren't speaking to him so much as at him, like a predator testing the strength of its cage.
They were faint at first, woven into the wind's howl and the distant rumble of artillery. Fragments of laughter, half-formed phrases in a language that felt both alien and intimate. As they drew closer to the city, the whispers grew clearer, threading through the noise of marching boots and clattering gear, until they seemed to curl directly into Deadpool's ears. "You do not belong here, yet you fit so well." He stumbled mid-step, blinking behind his mask. "Okay," he muttered, "either someone slipped hallucinogens into the rations, or I'm having a very meta moment." Vask glanced back at him sharply. "What did you say?" Deadpool waved a hand. "Nothing. Just talking to my, imaginary friends. You know, morale support." The sergeant grunted and turned away, unconvinced but too weary to press the matter. The whispers did not fade. "Chaos is a joke, little fool. Laughter is the true weapon. You understand this, don't you? You always have." Deadpool rubbed his temples, trying to focus. His healing factor worked on his brain as well as his body, usually keeping him just sane enough to function, but these voices were bypassing even that defense. They were digging deeper, clawing at the raw, unhealed parts of his mind. Images flashed unbidden, a grinning mask made of bone and shadow, a battlefield stretching into infinity, rivers of blood reflecting a sky split with laughter. He saw himself standing amidst it all, not as a man but as a jester crowned in fire, his laughter echoing across worlds. He staggered again, clutching his head. Vask's voice cut through the haze. "Mutant, what's wrong with you now?" Deadpool looked up sharply. His usual quip died on his tongue. The guardsman had halted just inside the outer walls, and for a moment the world seemed to ripple like disturbed water. The stone beneath his boots bled red, and the fortress spires melted into warped, writhing shapes. He blinked, and it was gone. The fortress stood as it had before, grim and solid, banners snapping in the smoky wind. The guardsman was staring at him with a mix of suspicion and fear. Deadpool forced a grin. "Just stretching. You know, keep the old spine limber." The sergeant didn't look convinced, but before he could reply, a low, guttural chanting rose from somewhere deeper in the city. The sound rolled over them like a wave, vibrating in their bones. "Rituals," one of the guardsmen whispered, voice trembling. "The priests are preparing for the siege." Deadpool frowned beneath his mask. He could still hear the other voice beneath the chanting, threading through it like a hidden melody. "Why do you fight for them?" it hissed. "These mortals fear you. They will never understand you. But I see you. I know your truth." He spun around, scanning the streets, but there was nothing there. The whispering chuckle that followed was softer than a breath, yet somehow deafening. The commissar appeared at the head of a column of reinforcements, his coat flaring dramatically in the wind. His gaze swept over the returning squad, tallying their losses with a cold efficiency that made even Vask flinch. "You survived," the commissar said flatly. "Good. Your sacrifice has bought us time." His eyes shifted to Deadpool, and something hard and calculating flickered there. "And you are proving useful. Perhaps the Emperor truly has a purpose for you." Deadpool tilted his head. "Oh sure, I'm super useful. Just point me at the bad guys and let me go snick-snickty blam." He mimed shooting guns, then slicing with his katanas. The commissar's lips thinned. "Your levity is ill-placed. The enemy gathers for their final assault. Soon, the walls will be tested." He gestured toward the fortress. "You will be tested." As the guardsmen moved past them, Vask gave Deadpool a brief, unreadable look before hurrying to join his men. Deadpool lingered at the rear, staring at the blood-stained horizon. The whispers swelled again, drowning out the sounds of marching boots and tolling bells. "You could save them, little fool, or you could break them. All it takes is one choice. One laugh in the right place, at the right time." Deadpool pressed his palms against his masked face and laughed aloud, though it was a brittle, hollow sound. "Great," he muttered. "Voices in my head that aren't me, just what I need." Far across the wasteland, in a temple of bone and iron, a chaos sorcerer sat amidst a circle of writhing sigils. His blind eyes opened, glowing with warp fire as he hissed a single word. Soon, Deadpool's laughter faltered as a sudden chill swept over him, though the air was thick with heat and smoke. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him he didn't want to acknowledge whispered back, The fortress city of Verkshold never slept. Even in the hours when the sky burned dark red with the smoke of distant bombardments, the walls trembled beneath the march of boots, the roar of sermons, and the endless tolling of bells, summoning the faithful to prayer. Searchlights swept across the outer ruins, in restless arcs, illuminating the huddled masses crammed within the inner gates, civilians, workers, and refugees alike, all clutching at their meager belongings, as though material things might shield them from the war grinding inexorably closer. Deadpool stood atop a crumbling section of battlement, watching the chaos below, with the sort of detached curiosity usually reserved for train wrecks or badly made reality television. His mask tilted slightly as he tracked a group of children darting through the crowd, their laughter sharp and brittle, amid the dirges echoing from the cathedral spires. "You know," he murmured to himself, "this place really needs an ice cream truck, or maybe a therapist, or both." The voices in his head had been growing louder since the skirmish with the cultists. What had begun as faint whispers now pressed against his skull, like claws scratching at bone. Sometimes they spoke in riddles, sometimes in laughter that was too wide, too sharp to be anything human. He had gotten used to talking to himself years ago, but this was different. This felt like someone, or something, talking back. Behind him, the heavy gates of the inner sanctum boomed open. Sergeant Vask emerged, his uniform singed and streaked with ash. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard, yet his movements were still precise. As he crossed the courtyard, he approached Deadpool cautiously, as one might approach a bomb with a faulty timer. "The commissar wants you inside," Vask said, voice low. "There's someone you need to meet." Deadpool hopped down from the battlement, landing with a flourish that made two nearby guardsmen instinctively raise their rifles. "Ooh, mysterious summons. Am I finally getting promoted, because I really want a shiny hat like yours?" Vask didn't respond. He merely gestured for Deadpool to follow, and led him into the cathedral's central nave. The vast chamber smelled of incense and decay. Candles flickered in brass holders along the walls, their light casting the towering statues of the Emperor into stark, shifting relief. Hundreds of kneeling figures filled the pews, their voices joined in a droning chant that seemed to vibrate in Deadpool's teeth. At the far end of the nave, before the massive altar, stood a frail figure draped in tattered robes. His head was shaved, his skin pale and almost translucent, veins visible beneath its thin surface. His eyes were hidden behind a strip of dirty linen, yet when he turned his head toward Deadpool, it felt as though those unseen eyes pierced directly into his mind. "That," Vask said softly, "is Astra Militarum, our regiment's sanctioned psyker." Deadpool squinted behind his mask. "Oh great, a blindfolded creepy guy. This'll go well." Malvek raised a trembling hand, and the chanting of the congregation ceased instantly, leaving the cathedral eerily silent. His voice, when he spoke, was cracked and whispery, yet it carried through the chamber like a blade cutting through cloth. "I have seen the rift," Malvek said. "I have felt its laughter bleed into the warp, and I have seen him." His hand extended, pointing unerringly at Deadpool. "The fool who laughs." Deadpool blinked. "Whoa, hold up. That's me, right? Please tell me that's not like a whole other guy I'm supposed to fight." Malvek ignored him, continuing with a slow, deliberate cadence. "A fool from beyond the stars, whose pain cannot be ended, whose laughter cannot be silenced. In his wake, worlds burn and empires fall. He comes at the hinge of fate, savior or destroyer, light or shadow. There is no middle path." The crowd of kneeling worshippers began to murmur, fear rippling through them like wind through dry grass. Some crossed themselves and whispered prayers. Others cast fearful glances at Deadpool, who gave them a sheepish wave. Vask's expression was grim. "This prophecy has been known among the psychers for generations," he said quietly. "A myth," they said, "a story to frighten children. But now..." The commissar stepped forward from the shadows near the altar. His boots clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step a note of authority. His face was set in its usual mask of cold disdain, but his eyes glittered with something harder: calculation, perhaps even fear. "Prophecy is a tool," the commissar said, "and tools can be wielded in many ways." His gaze locked on Deadpool,
Whether you are salvation or damnation, you will serve until you prove yourself one or the other. Deadpool tilted his head. So, no pressure, just the fate of an entire planet riding on whether I'm a good guy or a bad guy. Exactly, the Commissar said flatly. Malvek swayed suddenly, clutching at his temples. A thin wail escaped his lips as blood trickled from his nose. The congregation gasped. Vask rushed to steady him, but the psyker shoved him away, eyes rolling beneath his blindfold as he spoke in a voice not entirely his own. They come, Malvek croaked, the chosen of the laughing gods, the herald of the warp storm. They hunger for the fool's soul. The ground trembled. A low, distant rumble echoed through the cathedral, followed by the boom of heavy guns along the outer walls. Bells began to toll in alarm. The Commissar spun on his heel. To arms, the enemy is upon us. The congregation erupted into chaos, worshippers scattering as guardsmen poured into the nave, weapons ready. Vask barked orders, trying to impose order. Amid the confusion, Deadpool glanced toward the massive doors as they rattled under the impact of something massive outside. He said, drawing his katanas with a flourish. Just to clarify, when your creepy psychic guy says they're coming for the fool, that's definitely me, right? Malvek's voice was faint, barely audible above the growing din. Yes, he whispered. And if they take you, all is lost. Deadpool grinned behind his mask. Cool, cool. Guess that means they'll have to get in line. The doors shuddered again, splinters flying as an inhuman roar split the night. The siege had begun, and somewhere beyond the walls, something far more dangerous than cultists was closing in, drawn by the laughter only it could hear. The cathedral doors burst inward with a splintering crash, and a wave of terrified civilians spilled into the nave like floodwaters breaching a dam. Guardsmen shouted, trying to push them back, but panic had taken hold. The great bells above clanged wildly, their discordant tolls merging with the distant thunder of artillery. The sound was a single overwhelming note of chaos, a symphony of fear and desperation. Deadpool flipped his katanas in his hands, standing perfectly still amid the storm of motion. Through the mask, his eyes tracked the frightened mob, the frenzied soldiers, the Commissar barking orders, like a conductor trying to bring order to a broken orchestra. Okay, he muttered to himself, this is either a battle scene or the line for free tacos on a Tuesday. Vast, the Commissar roared above the din, get these vermin cleared from the nave. The defenses will hold without this rabble clogging the arteries of our city. Vask saluted and plunged into the crowd, his voice hoarse as he shouted command. Slowly, agonizingly, the civilians were herded back toward the lower vaults, where they would be locked behind barricades until the siege was resolved or until their deaths were deemed more useful to the Emperor in some other form of service. Deadpool leaned against a cracked marble pillar, watching the grim efficiency of it all. Wow, he said conversationally, you guys really know how to throw a party. No punch, no dancing, just herding the guests into a panic room while the sky exploded. The Commissar's head snapped toward him, his glare like a physical blow. Silence, fool. You will fight when ordered and speak only when commanded. Deadpool gave an exaggerated salute. Aye aye, Captain Buzzkill. The Commissar turned his back and began issuing orders to his aide. Scrolls and data slates were thrust into his hands by sweating junior officers, each more frantic than the last. The clash of battle was distant but growing closer, a steady drumbeat beneath the babble of voices. Vox units squawked reports from the outer trenches, lines of numbers and clipped phrases merging into a near incomprehensible stream of information. It was bureaucracy in its purest form, a machine built on faith and blood. Every decision was recorded, stamped blessed by a priest, and dispatched to be obeyed without question. A single misfiled command could doom 1,000 men, yet still the paperwork flowed like a river of parchment and ink. Deadpool watched, fascinated. So let me get this straight, he said, addressing no one in particular. You guys are about to get stormed by demon-worshipping lunatics, and the big plan is forms, paperwork. You fight the forces of hell with filing cabinet. An officer, carrying a stack of cogitator printouts, glared at him. These orders are the lifeblood of the regiment, he snapped. Without proper requisition forms, The artillery cannot fire, the Medicae cannot triage the wounded, and the Emperor's will cannot be fulfilled. Deadpool's shoulders shook with silent laughter.
No, man, I've fought space robots, cosmic tyrants, and Canadian tax collectors, but this is next-level nightmare fuel. His amusement faded as he noticed the soldiers filing past him toward the rampart. Their expressions were carved from stone, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion and dread. Many clutched relics or tattered prayer scrolls in one hand, while their rifles trembled in the other. These men and women were not warriors by nature. They were factory workers, miners, farmers, pressed into service by the endless hunger of the Imperium. They marched because to disobey meant death, not only for themselves but for their entire family. The thought struck Deadpool in an unexpected way. For all his irreverence, even he felt the weight of that silent, grinding machine. These people weren't heroes. They were cogs in a system too vast to comprehend, fighting and dying for a cause they barely understood. The commissar raised his voice, cutting through the oppressive hum of orders and prayers. The outer walls will be reinforced. No retreat is permitted. Should any man falter, I will personally administer the Emperor's mercy. He tapped the bolt pistol at his hip for emphasis, and a ripple of fear passed through the ranks. Deadpool muttered, "You know, in my world we have something called a pep talk. You might want to look into that." Vask returned, his face grim and sweat slicked. "Civilians. Secured. Commissar. The vaults are sealed." "Good," the commissar said. "You will take the mutant to the eastern parapet. Let us see if his abilities are as useful in a real siege as they were in a skirmish." Deadpool perked up. "Field trip. I call shotgun." Vask didn't dignify that with a response. He merely gestured for Deadpool to follow and led him through a labyrinth of corridors and stairwells. Along the way, they passed scenes of organized madness, wounded soldiers being branded with purity seals before receiving medical attention, priests screaming litanies of courage into the faces of terrified conscripts, tech priests communing with ancient machinery in guttural binary chants. At one junction, a scribe frantically scrawled names onto a massive ledger, his quill scratching furiously as stretcher-bearers carried the newly dead past him in a grim parade. Each body was tagged, recorded, and then carted away to the crematorium. There was no pause, no reverence, only the relentless rhythm of a war machine that could not afford to stop. Deadpool slowed, his usual chatter fading as he took it all in. For once, he didn't crack a joke. The sheer scope of the suffering pressed against him like a physical weight. Even through his fractured mind, he could sense the despair that hung over this place like a shroud. Vask noticed his silence, but said nothing. Perhaps, in some small way, he was relieved. When they finally emerged onto the eastern parapet, the night sky greeted them with a storm of fire. Flashes of distant explosions lit the horizon in lurid orange, revealing the dark tide of enemy forces advancing through the ruins. Cultist banners waved amid the horde, their symbols writhing as if alive. Beyond them, shapes too massive and misshapen to be human moved in the shadows, their roars carried on the wind. Deadpool whistled softly, "And here I thought Comic-Con crowds were bad." Vask shoved a lasgun into his hands. "Stay near me. Kill anything that isn't wearing our colors." Deadpool eyed the weapon, then shrugged and slung it over his shoulder. "Sure, why not? Though between you and me, I've got a few upgrades." The commissar's voice echoed from the Vox speakers mounted along the wall, cold and commanding. "For the Emperor, for Vaxhold, there will be no surrender." As the first wave of cultists charged, the defenders opened fire, lasbolts turning the night into a strobe-lit nightmare. Deadpool leapt forward with a laugh, plunging into the fray. Behind him, Vask muttered a prayer, not for victory, but for survival. He knew the enemy was only part of the danger. The real threat might very well be the unpredictable warrior now fighting at his side, whose laughter rose above the screams like a challenge to the very gods. The night sky above Vaxhold ignited, as the first wave of enemy fire screamed through the smoke-choked heavens. Artillery shells burst against the fortress walls in blossoms of fire and pulverized stone. The ground trembled beneath the impact, sending cracks racing through the already battered battlements. Searchlights flailed wildly, their beams slicing through drifting clouds of ash to reveal the oncoming horde.
a seething, endless tide of cultists and warp-spawned creatures rushing toward the city like a living avalanche. The defenders roared their defiance. Lasguns snapped and cracked in disciplined volleys, their red beams stitching the darkness with sudden searing lines of light. Heavy bolters thundered, each shot a concussive boom that tore gaping holes in the enemy ranks. Vox units blared frantic orders, their signals almost lost beneath the cacophony of war. Deadpool stood atop the parapet, arms stretched wide as though welcoming the apocalypse. "Oh man," he shouted over the din. "This is like every 4th of July rolled into one, but with more screaming and fewer hot dogs." Vask shot him a withering glare as he fired into the charging mob. "Focus, you lunatic. If you have strength to waste on words, you have strength to kill." Deadpool saluted with mock formality before leaping over the battlement entirely. For a heartbeat, the guardsman stared in disbelief as he plummeted toward the enemy line. Then he landed amidst the first rank of cultists, with a wet, meaty crunch, rising a moment later in a whirl of flashing katanas. Blood sprayed in crimson arcs under the searchlights as he carved a path through the enemy, his laughter echoing across the battlefield like a mad hymn. The sight was both terrifying and strangely inspiring. Some guardsmen cheered, redoubling their fire, as they watched the indestructible warrior cleave through foes who had once seemed unstoppable. Others whispered prayers more fervently, convinced they were witnessing some form of Daromet possession unleashed upon their enemies. The cultists faltered briefly, their charge disrupted by the sudden chaos Deadpool had wrought, but behind them, darker shapes stirred. A guttural horn blast rolled across the field, low and resonant, and the tide surged forward again with renewed fury. Vask's voice roared over the vox beads. "Hold your lines. Reinforcements are coming from the western wall. Emperor Protector." Deadpool's laughter rose higher, as he hurled himself deeper into the fray. Blades slashed, bullets tore through his flesh, limbs were hacked away, only to knit back together in grotesque, impossible displays of regeneration. The more the enemy tried to destroy him, the more relentless he became. And yet, amidst the slaughter, something began to change. The voices in his head swelled to a deafening chorus, no longer whispers but a riot of laughter and commands. "Dance for them, little fool," they hissed. "Show them the joke of mortality. The punchline is always blood." Deadpool stumbled for a moment, clutching his head. Reality shimmered. The battlefield wavered like a heat haze, and for an instant he saw something else entirely. A vast carnival of horrors, stretching into infinity, tents made of flayed skin, banners woven from screaming mouths. At its center stood a throne of broken masks, and on that throne sat a figure that was both him and not him, its smile carved wide enough to split the sky. "Okay," Deadpool gasped, staggering back into the present as a cultist lunged at him. "That's not great." He decapitated the attacker almost absently, still reeling from the vision. On the wall above, Vask saw the momentary falter and cursed. "Cover him." Heavy teams lay down, suppressing fire. The guardsmen obeyed, their weapons hammering into the advancing ranks. Explosions tore open gory craters, briefly slowing the assault. But the enemy was endless. Even as one wave fell, another surged forward, driven by a madness that fear could not quench. The commissar strode along the battlements, his greatcoat snapping in the wind, like a banner of war. His voice rang out cold and unyielding, cutting through the chaos. "Stand fast. There is no retreat. By the Emperor's will, you will hold this wall, or die upon it." The soldiers straightened, their firing lines steadied by sheer terror of his wrath. Deadpool, hearing the speech from below, shouted back, "Hey, inspirational speeches are my thing, but nice delivery. Very grim, very dramatic." Then a new sound rose above the din, a deep resonant chanting that seemed to come from the earth itself. The cultist ranks parted, and through them advanced a towering figure, clad in armor of rusted iron and bone. Warp light burned in its hollow eye sockets, and a staff crowned with writhing sigils pulsed with dark power. Vask's breath caught. "A sorcerer," he said, voice filled with dread. The commissar's expression hardened. "Bring it down, now." The sorcerer raised its staff, and the air screamed. Reality tore open in jagged lines, as demons clawed their way into existence, their forms shifting and flickering like half-formed nightmares. The first of them leapt toward the wall, its claws carving deep furrows into the stone. Guardsmen screamed as the creature plucked them from the parapet and hurled them into the seething horde below. Deadpool spun to face the new arrivals, his laughter faltering into something sharper, more manic. "Oh good, monsters from another dimension." Just when I thought things were getting boring, he launched himself at the nearest daemon, slicing it apart in a frenzy of motion. The creature dissolved into warp fire, shrieking as it vanished back into nothingness. But for every daemon destroyed, two more emerged, their howls mingling with the cultists' chants. On the battlements, Vask's line wavered, soldiers died by the dozen, their bodies tumbling into the blood-soaked mud below. The commissar shot 3 men himself when they tried to flee, his bolt pistol roaring as he enforced his decree of no retreat. Amidst the carnage, Malvek the Psyker staggered onto the wall, his blindfold soaked with sweat and blood. He clutched at Vask's arm, his voice a rasp barely audible over the battle. "The fool must reach the sorcerer," he hissed. "Only his madness can cut through the warp storm. If he falls, we all fall." Vask's eyes widened. He looked down to where Deadpool was carving a path through the daemons, his form barely visible amid the swirling chaos. "Emperor, help us," he muttered. "That's our only hope." The sorcerer's chant rose to a crescendo. Warp light flared, and the ground beneath the fortress cracked open, vomiting forth a tide of writhing, clawed limbs. Deadpool staggered but did not fall, his blades dripping gore as he turned toward the towering figure. "All right," he growled, voice stripped of humor, for the first time since his arrival. "Let's see who gets the last laugh." The next moment was swallowed by the roar of battle as the siege reached its terrifying peak. The sorcerer's chanting grew louder, each guttural syllable a knife twisting through the air. Warp light bathed the battlefield in a sickly green glow, casting monstrous shadows that writhed and split like living things. Deadpool stood amid the carnage, chest heaving, his katanas dripping ichor that hissed as it struck the blood-soaked mud. All around him, guardsmen screamed and died while the daemons poured forth in endless waves, clawing at the walls, tearing apart flesh and stone alike. The voices in his head rose in perfect harmony with the sorcerer's chant. They were no longer scattered whispers, no longer the half-mad banter he had lived with for so long. They were unified now, clear and sharp, and they were laughing. Closer, they urged. "You hear him, don't you? He knows, he understands you. Step through the curtain, little fool, and you'll see the joke of the universe laid bare." Deadpool staggered, clutching at his head. He could feel the sorcerer's presence like a claw hooked into his brain, pulling him forward through the madness. The battlefield blurred and twisted before his eyes, until the screams of the dying became a hideous carnival tune, the clash of weapons a rhythmic drum beat. The ground beneath his feet turned soft and shifting, like walking on the backs of thousands of whispering tongues. And then, in an instant, the battlefield was gone. Deadpool found himself standing in a vast endless void filled with floating masks, each one bearing a different expression: joy, sorrow, rage, fear, all of them distorted into grotesque parodies. A throne of bone and shadow loomed ahead, and seated upon it was a figure cloaked in writhing smoke. Its face was a mask, a perfect reflection of Deadpool's own, but stretched into a smile too wide to be human. "Nice decor," Deadpool said hoarsely, though his usual humor faltered. "Bit of an ego thing though, having my face up there. Kind of creepy actually." The figure chuckled, a sound that reverberated through the void and rattled his teeth. "Creepy? Oh no, Wade Wilson, this is home, the place you've always belonged, though you've never admitted it." Its voice shifted constantly, male, female, childlike, ancient, as if all possibilities spoke at once. "The galaxy is a stage, and you, my little fool, are its greatest joke." Deadpool forced a laugh. "Yeah, well, I've been called worse. So what's the punchline, huh? Why drag me to this acid trip nightmare?" The figure's smoke-shrouded form leaned forward, and suddenly, they were eye to eye. "Because you are different, you do not die, you do not break, you laugh when others weep." The figure's many voices merged into a single hiss. "You are mine." Deadpool's hand twitched toward his sword, but the blade was gone, swallowed by the void. Pretty sure I'm more of a free agent type, not big on the whole serving ancient warp god thing. You already serve me, the entity per every joke, every violent act, every time you mock the suffering of others, you feed me. Even now, your laughter echoes across the warp, images flickered around them, his battles, his kills, his careless words that had masked pain and horror, each one twisted into a grotesque puppet show, strings pulled by invisible hands. The figure spread its arms wide. Join me willingly, and I will give you what you truly desire. Power beyond imagination, a way home, the freedom to be the punchline and the storyteller both.
Deadpool hesitated. The idea of going home, of returning to his own world where the rules at least made sense, stabbed through him like a knife. For a moment he could almost see it: familiar streets, old faces, tacos that didn't taste like ration packs in despair. But then he saw the faces of the guardsmen, the terrified civilians huddled in the vaults beneath Raxhold, Sergeant Vask shouting orders even as the walls crumbled around him. They were fighting and dying while he stood here, bartering with madness. Deadpool straightened slowly. "Tempting offer," he said, his tone almost serious. "But there's just one problem." The figure tilted its head. "Oh? And what is that, little fool?" Deadpool grinned beneath his mask, the familiar manic edge returning. "I don't take orders. Not from governments, not from bosses, and definitely not from a space demon with bad dental hygiene." The figure's laughter was deafening. The masks around them split open, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Then you choose to oppose me? You think you can defy the will of chaos itself?" Deadpool shrugged. "Pretty much, yeah. I've been told I'm very annoying that way." The void shattered like glass, and he was back on the battlefield, gasping as smoke and fire rushed back into his lungs. The sorcerer loomed before him, staff raised high, warp energy crackling around its form. "You could have been a god," the sorcerer hissed, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Instead you will be nothing but meat for the swarm." Deadpool rolled his shoulders, his hands tightening around his swords. "Buddy, you clearly haven't read my resume. Meat doesn't stay down." The sorcerer thrust his staff forward, and a torrent of warp fire exploded toward him. Deadpool dove through it, his flesh charring and peeling away, only to regrow in the same instant. He roared and struck, blades flashing in a whirlwind of motion. The battle around them became a blur. Guardsmen fell back toward the inner defenses, shouting in confusion as Deadpool and the sorcerer clashed in a storm of light and shadow. Warp-born monstrosities screamed as they were cut down or dissolved back into the Imperium, their forms unraveling under the pressure of Deadpool's chaotic energy. As they fought, the figure's voice whispered again in his mind, softer now, almost coaxing. "The offer remains. Power, home, freedom. Take my hand and end this fight with a thought." Deadpool laughed, a raw, defiant sound that drowned out the whisper. "Here's my answer," he snarled, plunging both swords deep into the sorcerer's chest. The warp light flared blindingly, and the sorcerer screamed, a sound that was not entirely his own, as he collapsed into nothingness. Deadpool stood over the fading remnants, chest heaving. "Yeah," he panted, "I'll take a hard pass on the cosmic cult membership." But even as the battlefield began to steady, even as the daemons faltered and retreated, he could still hear faint laughter echoing in the corners of his mind. The bargain had been refused, but the game was far from over. The battlefield stank of burned flesh and ruptured earth, a charnel house laid bare beneath the blood-colored moon. The retreating daemons had left behind twisted, half-formed corpses that smoldered in unnatural hues, their bodies unraveling into greasy smoke as they dissolved back into the warp. Deadpool stood amid the carnage, his chest rising and falling as his healing factor worked overtime to stitch him back together. Around him, the guardsmen of Raxhold staggered into uneasy formations, their weapons trembling in their hands, their eyes wide and hollow with exhaustion. For the moment, the enemy had been driven back. The fortress walls still stood, though cracked and blackened. Fires raged in the outer districts where shells had struck home, and the wails of the wounded rose like a discordant hymn above the clatter of medical teams rushing through the rubble. It was a fragile, fleeting reprieve, one that felt more like the sharp inhale before a scream than a true victory. Deadpool wiped a smear of ichor from his mask and gave a mock bow to the scattered survivors. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes tonight's performance of Slice, Dice and Everything's Not Nice. Please hold your applause or your vomit. No one laughed. The guardsmen only stared at him, some in awe, others in fear. Vask, limping and bloodied, approached with a weary grimace. His voice was hoarse but steady. You held them back. Emperor, help me. You actually did it. Deadpool shrugged. Team effort. You guys softened them up with the whole Laskin pew-pew thing, and I provided the flashy finale. He twirled his katanas before sliding them back into their sheaths. Now, where's the after party? Preferably with tacos. Vask didn't answer. His gaze shifted toward the looming figure of the commissar, who was descending the steps of the inner wall with the measured precision of a predator stalking prey. His greatcoat was immaculate, despite the battle, his expression carved from stone. The guardsmen straightened automatically as he passed, though fear gleamed in their eyes. The commissar surveyed the carnage in silence before speaking. The enemy is repelled, but not defeated. They will return in greater numbers, with greater fury. This battle has only begun. His cold gaze turned to Deadpool. And you are both our salvation and our doom. Deadpool tilted his head. You say the sweetest things. Really warms the heart. The commissar's jaw tightened. Do not mistake my words for approval. You are an anomaly, a creature the Imperium cannot control. I will not allow this regiment or this world to be corrupted by you. Vask's eyes widened. My lord, without him we would have been overrun. The sorcerer would still live, and the daemons. Enough, Sergeant. The commissar snapped. His hand rested casually on the grip of his bolt pistol. You think short term. I think of the Imperium. A single victory means nothing if it seeds heresy that festers and spreads. The soldiers nearby shifted uneasily. They had seen Deadpool fight, seen him take wounds that would have killed 10 men and rise again laughing. To them, he was both a miracle and a nightmare. Their loyalty to the commissar warred with a desperate hope that perhaps this strange, unkillable warrior truly was a weapon sent by the Emperor. Deadpool spread his arms theatrically. Wow. Tough crowd. I save your collective behinds, and you still want to play firing squad. Real gratitude vibes here. The commissar's gaze did not waver. You are dangerous, you are unholy, and you are unpredictable. His voice dropped to a near whisper, meant only for Vask. He must be eliminated, but not openly. The men would revolt if I executed their newfound hero in plain sight. We must be precise. Vask stiffened. My lord, you can't mean. I do. The commissar's eyes were like chips of ice. Spread the word that the creature is being sent on a special mission to strike at the heart of the enemy. Choose a squad of the most expendable soldiers to accompany him. Ensure they do not return. Vask's throat worked as he swallowed back the urge to protest. His hands trembled slightly, whether from battle fatigue or anger. Even he could not tell. And if he survives, then, the commissar said coolly, we will adapt. Even miracles can be managed or destroyed. Deadpool, oblivious to the low-voiced exchange, was crouched near a pile of smoldering daemon remains, poking at them with a stick. Do you think these things smell worse going in or coming out? Asking for a friend. Vask closed his eyes briefly, before turning to address the guardsmen. You heard the commissar. We strike at dawn. Prep for a forward assault. Full kit. Full ammo. This will be decisive. Murmurs spread through the ranks. The soldiers were bone-tired, their faces pale beneath the grime, but none dared question the order. In the Imperium, obedience was survival. As the men dispersed to ready themselves, Deadpool bounded over to Vask, clapping him on the shoulder with blood-slicked hands. Field trip round 2. So what's the plan this time? Are we hitting their Taco Bell or their HQ first? Vask forced a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. You'll see soon enough. The commissar watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. To him, this was not murder. It was necessary maintenance of imperial order. One uncontrollable element, no matter how effective, could not be allowed to disrupt the sacred machine of war. Night fell heavy over Vatsold. Fires burned in the ruins beyond the walls, casting long, dancing shadows across the parapet. Somewhere in the darkness, cultist horns sounded again, a promise that the enemy was already regrouping. Deadpool leaned casually against a barricade, humming tunelessly as he sharpened his swords.
He seemed utterly at ease, as if he hadn't just fought a battle against nightmares. Yet when he glanced toward the city's heart, he caught a flicker of movement, someone watching him from an upper window, then vanishing. For a moment, the voices surged again in his mind, louder and more mocking than before. They plot against you, fool. They fear what they cannot control. Strike first, before they strike you. Deadpool froze. The laughter in his head was deafening, mingling with the faint echoes of the enemy horns. He exhaled slowly and pushed it aside, or tried to. Relax, he muttered to himself. You're paranoid, or more paranoid than usual. Totally normal. Behind him, the commissar conferred quietly with his aides, already setting his trap in motion. At dawn, they would march into the ruins, and one way or another, the laughing fool's fate would be sealed. The first light of day bled through the smoke-choked sky, painting the battlefield in shades of crimson and gray. It looked, Deadpool thought, like a stage, being set for the final act of a very bad play, and as always, he was cast in the role of the fool. The morning broke beneath a sky, the color of old bruises, purple and black clouds churning in unnatural spirals, lighting without thunder, split the heavens, jagged veins of warp light that left after images seared into the eyes of those who dared to look up. Beyond the outer ruins, a storm had taken form, a vast wall of shifting mist and shadow that swallowed everything it touched. Within that storm, shapes moved, half-glimpsed monstrosities that seemed too large, too wrong to be real. Deadpool stood at the vanguard of the strike force, his katanas strapped across his back, his usual irreverent energy oddly subdued. The air here was thick and heavy, tasting of metal and rot. Every breath clung to his lungs like wet cloth. He turned his masked face toward Vask, who was issuing final orders to the weary guardsmen gathered behind them. "All right, gang," Deadpool said, his voice oddly bright against the oppressive silence. "Quick roll call, before we march into the giant haunted cotton candy machine. Who here packed extra socks, and who brought marshmallows? No? Just me? Okay." No one laughed. The guardsmen's faces were pale beneath layers of grime and ash. Some whispered prayers, others clutched small relics in trembling hands. They knew they were walking into the jaws of the abyss, and none expected to return. Vask's voice was hoarse as he barked commands, forcing them into a semblance of discipline. The commissar had remained behind at the fortress, citing the need to coordinate the defense. In truth, he did not need to be here to see his gambit unfold. This mission was a death sentence, both for the cultists, entrenched deep within the warp storm, and for Deadpool. "Form up," Vask ordered, eyes sharp. "No hesitation. If you fall behind, you're lost." The squad moved forward, their boots crunching over broken stone and charred bone. The ruins of manufactorums loomed like skeletal giants, their twisted spires reaching desperately toward the sky. The storm ahead pulsed and writhed, its edges seething with colors that had no place in the natural world. Deadpool tilted his head back to stare at. "You know," he said, "back home, this would be where the ominous music starts playing. I don't hear any violins though." Missed opportunity. As they crossed into the storm, sound itself seemed to warp. The clash of distant artillery faded into a dull, throbbing hum. The light dimmed, replaced by a shifting, unearthly glow that made shadows behave as if they had wills of their own. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the world reduced to blurred silhouettes, and the rasp of labored breathing. The guardsmen tightened their formation instinctively. Every step forward felt wrong, like walking against the pull of unseen tides. The ground was no longer solid stone, but a patchwork of cracked flagstones, slick flesh, and pulsing veins that twitched beneath their boots. Deadpool crouched to poke one of the veins with his finger. It twitched violently, and a gurgling sound echoed through the fog. "Gross," he said cheerfully, "and kind of cool. 10 out of 10 for creep factor." "Stay focused," Vask snarled, though his voice trembled. "This place is unnatural." "Unnatural," Deadpool replied. "Buddy, I'm unnatural. This is just Tuesday." The storm deepened as they pushed forward, the mist growing thicker and darker. Whispers rose from every direction, fragments of laughter and weeping that crawled under their skin. Some guardsmen began muttering prayers louder, desperate to drown out the voices. Deadpool, however, heard them clearly. Little fool, the voices cooed. You came back to us. Didn't we offer you everything? Freedom, power, purpose. He stiffened, shaking his head violently. Not today, creepy brain demons. I've got a schedule to keep. The fog shifted, and a shape emerged. A colossal figure stitched together from corpses, its many faces screaming in unison. It lumbered forward on legs that bent the wrong way, a rusted cleaver, clutched in one clawed hand. The guardsman opened fire. Last bolts seared into the abomination's flesh, but the creature barely slowed. It swung its cleaver, cleaving a squadmate in half with a single blow. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, steaming as it hit the warped ground. Deadpool sprang forward, swords flashing. Hey, Meat Mountain, over here. He leapt onto the creature's back, hacking furiously. Black ichor sprayed as he carved through tendon and bone, laughing even as the monster's claws tore through his torso. Limbs severed and regrew in a grisly dance, his regeneration barely keeping pace with the damage. The guardsmen took heart at the sight, redoubling their fire. Under the combined assault, the abomination finally toppled, crashing into the mist with a wet, bone-snapping thud. Vask's voice rang out. Move, keep moving, the ritual site is close. They pushed onward, driven by desperation and dwindling ammunition. The mist thinned for a moment, revealing a massive cathedral-like structure at the heart of the storm. Its spires twisted impossibly high, vanishing into the warped sky. Symbols of the dark gods writhed across its walls, shifting and merging as if alive. As they approached, Deadpool felt the pull grow stronger. His vision swam, reality flickering like a broken reel of film. One moment he was marching with the squad, the next he was alone in a vast arena surrounded by jeering, faceless crowds. His hands were empty, his body heavy, and the laughter of the voices was deafening. This is your stage, they whispered. Play your part, be the fool, dance for us, and we will let you live. Deadpool roared, forcing the hallucination back. When his vision cleared, he was kneeling before the cathedral's gates, his blades clenched tight. The guardsmen were nowhere to be seen. Vask, he shouted. His voice was swallowed by the storm. The great gates creaked open on their own. From the darkness beyond, a low chuckle drifted out, unmistakable and horribly familiar. Welcome home, the voice purred. Deadpool swallowed hard, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. Whatever awaited him in that cathedral wasn't just another fight, it was the heart of the storm, the punchline to a joke he hadn't yet heard, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. The gates closed behind Deadpool with a shudder that reverberated through the warped cathedral, sealing him inside. Darkness swallowed him whole, so complete it felt like a physical thing pressing against his skin. Even his own breathing seemed muffled, as though the air itself was thick and unwilling to carry sound. The only illumination came from strange floating motes of sickly green light, their glow twisting and pulsing like dying stars. The structure's vast interior stretched out endlessly, its walls lined with statues of figures whose faces had been carved into permanent, mocking grin. As Deadpool moved deeper, those statues seemed to shift in the corners of his vision, their expressions subtly changing, their eyes following him. Okay, he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Creepy haunted cathedral, check. Possible hallucinations, double check. Missing squadmates who probably got eaten or turned into meat furniture, triple check. He paused, tilting his head. Also, 0 taco stands. Very disappointing. A low, resonant chuckle rolled through the chamber, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound vibrated in Deadpool's bones, setting his teeth on edge. You came, little fool, the voice said, rich with amusement. You followed the script perfectly, as you always do. Even when you think you improvise, you are still dancing to our tune. Deadpool drew his katanas with a rasp of metal spinning in a slow circle. Funny, I don't remember signing up for community theater night, and if there's a script, I'm definitely gonna ad-lib. The motes of light gathered, coalescing into a towering figure cloaked in writhing shadow. Its mask was a grotesque parody of Deadpool's own face, stretched impossibly wide into a grin that seemed to split the world. Around it, warped banners unfurled from the walls, displaying symbols of the dark gods, skulls, teeth, endless spirals, all merging into one ever-shifting icon. The figure's laughter rose. You have no idea what you are, do you? No idea why you heal, why you laugh, in the why you heal, why you laugh, in the face of death. It is because you are ours. You are the perfect vessel for chaos, for comedy and tragedy intertwined. Even now, the warp sings through your veins. Deadpool's grip on his swords tightened. I've been called a lot of things, pal. Psycho, lunatic, fashion disaster, but vessel, that one's new. The figure's head tilted. Do you deny it? Look around you. These mortals you fight for, they fear you. The commissar plots your death. Even as he uses you, the sergeant would sacrifice you to save his own soul. Only we embrace you, Wade Wilson. Only we understand the joke of the universe. Images flickered to life around Deadpool like scenes on a broken projector. He saw Vask leading the guardsmen through the storm, their eyes filled with despair. He saw the commissar speaking in hushed tones, his plan to dispose of Deadpool playing out like a cruel pantomime. And beyond that, he saw himself, not here, but elsewhere, in another reality, a man laughing as he was shot, stabbed, burned, and never dying, a fool, who could never stop moving, never stop talking, never stop killing. His breath hitched beneath the mask. No, he said quietly, no, I'm not your puppet. I make my own choices, my own jokes. The figure laughed again, louder, harsher. Then prove it. Kill me, kill the master of this stage, and take my throne, or kneel, and become more than you have ever been, a god among mortals feared and adored. All you must do is laugh. The cathedral shifted violently. The statues along the walls began to move, stepping down from their pedestals with grinding, bone-cracking sounds. They converged on Deadpool, their grins stretching wider, their hands reaching out. Deadpool backflipped away, his blades flashing. The first statue shattered under his strike, but two more took its place, their stone fingers clawing at him. He spun and sliced his body, moving on instinct, as the voices screamed in his head, kill, fall, kill, and laugh. The stage demands blood. No, Deadpool roared. This isn't your show. This is my punchline. With a surge of manic strength, he cut through the statues, his laughter rising, not the hollow madness of the warp, but something defiant, almost human. The figure watched, its shadow form rippling, its amusement curdling into rage. Enough pretense. The shadow surged forward, coalescing into a monstrous form, with clawed hands, and a mask that split into 4 grinning mouths. Warp energy crackled around it, filling the cathedral with a storm of screaming faces. Deadpool charged. The clash was cataclysmic. Blades met claws, sparks flying as reality itself seemed to buckle. The cathedral's floor shattered beneath their feet, exposing a swirling abyss of raw warp energy below. Deadpool was torn apart again, and again, his limbs severed, his body crushed, yet each time he reformed, laughing wildly. You think pain scares me? He shouted, plunging both swords into the creature's chest. Pain's my roommate. The figure screeched, its form unraveling into a vortex of masks and laughter. Warp light flared, blinding in its intensity. As the entity dissolved, Deadpool found himself standing on a cracked, floating fragment of stone above the abyss. The laughter in his head was silent now. The motes of light faded, leaving only the dim glow of his own breath. Slowly, a single tattered banner unfurled at his feet. It bore no sigil of the dark gods, only a crude, painted image of a masked figure holding a sword and laughing. His sword, his mask. Deadpool stared at it for a long moment, his chest heaving. Oh great, he muttered. So now I'm a symbol. That never ends well. Far below, the abyss roared, and a distant horn echoed through the warp storm. The battle outside was still raging. His friends, if they could even be called that, were dying, and the enemy would not stop just because he'd taken out their ringleader. Deadpool tightened his grip on his swords and turned toward the shattered gates. Guess the show's not over yet. And with that he leapt back into the storm, ready to face the next act. The storm dissolved around him as Deadpool burst through the shattered gates, tumbling into the chaos of the battlefield outside. What had once been an organized clash of lines had devolved into a grotesque melee. The ground was slick with blood and ichor, the air choked with smoke so thick it turned men into shadows and daemons into nightmares, glimpsed only at the last second. The walls of Raxhold were cracked and crumbling, entire sections collapsed inward where the enemy had breached. Deadpool rolled to his feet, swords flashing as he cut down two cultists who lunged at him from the side. His body was battered, pieces of flesh missing only to stitch themselves back together in moments. His breathing was ragged, but his eyes were alight with manic determination. He looked up at the walls, and saw Vask, his uniform, torn and soaked with grime, rallying what few guardsmen remained. "Hold," Vask's voice was hoarse, but carried over the din. "For the Emperor, for Vraxhold." His words were swallowed by an inhuman roar. A pack of daemons, their bodies a blur of claws and teeth, surged forward, tearing through the last line of defenders. The guardsmen fired desperately, lasguns snapping, but their courage was breaking. Deadpool sprinted toward the tide, leaping into its midst like a living missile. His blades whirled in a storm of steel and gore, his laughter cutting through the screams like a jagged edge. He was everywhere at once, struck down and rising again, his indestructible form, the only thing holding back the chaos long enough for the others to regroup. Behind him, guardsmen stared in awe and horror. To them, he was no longer a man, but a weapon, a force of nature wrapped in a garish red mask. Some began chanting prayers, not to the Emperor, but to the fool who laughed in the face of death. Others simply fired until their rifles overheated, too afraid to look away. Vask saw it and felt a chill run down his spine. This was exactly what the Commissar had feared. If Deadpool survived this day, the line between hero and heretic would blur until it vanished entirely. But there was no time for doubt. The enemy was faltering. The warp storm above began to thin, its roiling clouds unraveling as the dark energy fueling them dissipated. The death of the sorcerer had severed the cultists' link to their demonic masters, and without it, their coordination crumbled. Deadpool stood amid a ring of corpses, his chest heaving, his suit was soaked black with blood, his swords chipped and dull. "All right," he panted. "Who's next? Anyone?" "Beulah." No answer came, only the retreating wails of the surviving cultists as they scattered into the ruins. The daemons dissolved into vapor, their forms unraveling with agonized shrieks. The battlefield went eerily quiet, save for the crackle of fires and the low moans of the dying. Slowly, Vask descended from the wall, his boots crunching on broken stone. The surviving guardsmen gathered behind him, forming a ragged line. They stared at Deadpool with expressions that mixed reverence and terror. "It's over," Vask said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "The city is..." Deadpool sheathed his swords and stretched his arms, his joints popping loudly. "Saved. Buddy, this place looks like the set of a really bad horror movie. Pretty sure the property value's shot." A few guardsmen let out strained laughs, quickly stifled under Vask's glare.